all Caucasian, which is representative of this area. But we don't know who those 6 alternates are until the end of all of this tough testimony.
And I know they went through a rigorous jury selection process over those 6 days. Matt Johnson, thank you so much for that report. Let's bring in our guest for this hour, trial attorney and family law attorney Michelle Thomas, standing by. Michelle, this is one of those cases that has captured so many people's attention, but we're seeing these 2 trials because they aren't going to trial together. Sometimes we do see joint trials when there's a husband and a wife who are accused of the exact same crimes, the killing of these 3 individuals. Tell me about whether or not you think they should have been separate, especially with the similarities of these cases and the evidence and the undertaking of bringing all of this in front of another jury.
Yeah, good afternoon, Julia, and thanks so much for having me. So you're right. I mean, there are a lot of similarities here and a lot of overlapping evidence, and it is heartbreaking for these witnesses and the families to have to endure hearing all this evidence again. However, when you have a situation where there's co-defendants who could easily blame the other, which it appears as though Chad Daybell's strategy may be to blame Lori for the murders of the 2 young children and Tammy Daybell, that's where there's a conflict of interest, and that's where there's really a divergent approach to the trial itself. And I think that's the reason why they needed to bring these 2 cases separately, because of that very apparent conflict of interest. Even though Lori didn't take that approach in terms of blaming Chad, I think Chad may very well take that approach against her.
Oh yeah, will he take the stand to explain it? Because we did hear that in the opening statement that his lawyer made, pointing the finger very vehemently at Lori Vallow Daybell. Let's take a look back. Matt Johnson's back in the courthouse, but he did file this report with a look back at the case against Lori and Chad Daybell.
Are going to throw her under, not a bus, but a steamroller.
Michelle Thomas still with us. The steamroller we've seen start to roll inside of that courtroom in the way that this defense laid out their opening statement. And perhaps we'll see it in the cross-examination, in the way that they handle the detective who's on the stand. Can you talk about how much more difficult a death penalty case is for attorneys, especially when they have to wear almost 2 hats, because there's going to be a guilt phase, and then if there's a guilty verdict, a penalty phase?
Yeah, there's a significant, I mean, the stakes are higher, right? I mean, you're talking about your client's life that's on the line here and on your shoulders. And so there's a significant, I think, burden that is associated, obviously, with the death penalty case. And then to your point, there are 2 phases if, in fact, he is found guilty. And so at every turn, the defense counsel has to be thinking about how the evidence will impact not just the penalty phase, but also the sentencing phase, if, in fact, it gets to that point. So it does complicate matters for defense counsel when you have the death penalty on the table.
Yeah, I imagine how difficult it is, especially in a case where this one has such overwhelming evidence. So there is a likelihood that we're going to see a guilty verdict. But sometimes how you handle the guilt phase, if you have this jury that's going to be the same jury, in some situations in different jurisdictions there may be a different jury, but in this case, same jury would hear the penalty phase. You don't want them to not like your client. You don't want the client to come off as a liar. That may even impact whether or not you let your client take the stand, because if they say, I didn't do it, and they find him guilty, then he's got to argue afterward, okay, I did do it, but don't give me death.
Yeah, I mean, defense counsel has to tread lightly, right? I mean, they have to certainly defend their client vigorously in attempting to get an acquittal, even though we don't think that's likely. And at the same time, they have to balance that fine line between showing a level of remorse or empathy toward the families and the victims' families here, so that you don't turn off the jury such that they are ready, willing, and able to just, impose the death penalty. So it is a fine line that defense counsel has to take in balancing presentation of the evidence, putting forth a zealous defense of their client, and at the same time thinking about trying to preserve his life to the extent that he is found guilty.
Certainly true. Michelle Thomas, stand by. We do have to squeeze in a break, but coming up, we've been following some breaking news all across the country. The death of OJ Simpson at the age of 76 and a verdict in the Apple River stabbings trial. We've got the latest there. Keep it right here on Court TV. Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are continuing to follow breaking news across the country. OJ Simpson has died at the age of 76 after a battle with prostate cancer. His family released a statement on his X, formerly known as Twitter account, saying that Simpson was surrounded by, quote, his children and grandchildren when he died. In 1995, the football star was acquitted of charges for killing his former wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ronald Goldman. They were both brutally stabbed to death the year prior to that 1995 verdict. This was in 1994 that they were killed at her home.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information.
An attorney for victim Ronald Goldman's family said that OJ Simpson, quote, died without penance. Let's bring in our guest that is standing by, trial attorney and family law attorney Michelle Thomas. Michelle, this is one of those days where the news had everyone scrambling around here at Court TV because really it changed the landscape. That trial and OJ Simpson being the kind of infamous criminal defendant, it changed the way people watch trials. It's one of the things that launched Court TV back in the 90s. Your thoughts on just that era that was marked by OJ Simpson?
Yeah, you know, Julia, I think all of us remember, who are old enough, remember exactly what we were doing, where we were when we saw the police chase of that white Ford Bronco, when the trial began and went on and on for months and months. I mean, I think it's just one of those incidents in time that marks history. And so today, to look at his death and, you know, reflect on his legacy, it's a complicated legacy. You know, on the one hand, he's sort of the greatest, you know, of all time. He's the GOAT in terms of football and all the records that he set, both in college and in the NFL, but he also has a very storied past. And I think that trial is really what galvanized the country, if not the world, around the interest in the justice system and watching trials, and certainly, to your point, put Court TV on the map. So it was really a memorable and remarkable time in history.
Yeah, Michelle, it didn't stop with the verdict. I mean, it's one of those remarkable verdicts where even the Supreme Court justices paused what they were doing at the Supreme Court to get a note to say what the verdict was. I mean, that's unheard of. You think about back in the 90s, people didn't have their cell phones so that they could text people. Everyone wanted to be in front of a television or get that information because it was so impactful. But the fascination with that trial didn't stop, and just the questioning of what happened, why it happened, and even a shift in public opinion as to whether or not he did it or not, did not do it. Your thoughts on just what transpired after that in terms of watching this trial and the documentaries made?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very polarizing case, primarily along the lines of racial divides, right? I mean, if you remember just a few years prior to this, there was a Rodney King situation that occurred in Los Angeles, and so there was already tension between, you know, law enforcement and the community. And then you have this OJ Simpson trial where there were racial epithets that were brought into evidence by Mark Furman, one of the officers. You know, so all of that was really very polarizing at that time. And so, you know, today when we reflect on it, the forensics have evolved so much and have advanced so much in terms of forensic evidence and the science. You know, there may have been a different verdict today as opposed to 28 years ago. But I do think that we saw the remnants for years to come based upon the racial tensions that were occurring at that time.
We will certainly continue to follow this story, but for now, let's go back into court in the case that we are following out of Boise, Idaho. The Doomsday Prophet murder trial. The defendant is Chad Daybell. He's charged with murdering his first wife, Tammy Daybell, and his new wife, Lori Vallow Daybell's children, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. On the stand, we're watching Detective Ray Hermosillo from the Rexburg Police Department. He searched for those missing children and even interviewed Chad Daybell. All right, we've got to pause there inside of the courtroom because of a sidebar. Let's bring back in trial attorney and family law attorney Michelle Thomas. Michelle, I wanted to get your reaction to something that we have in terms of the evidence that's related to what we're hearing from this detective. He's talking about the search of Chad Daybell's property, the digging up of those remains. He's going through with this jury what they found, the flesh, the skull, the teeth. I mean, it's hard to even imagine what it was like for those excavators to go in. But let's listen to the jail call that happened not too long after, or probably while this was all going on, between a Lori Vallow Daybell, who was behind bars, and Chad Daybell, who was not yet charged.
Hi, Dad.
Hello?
Are you okay?
So they're searching the property.
Are they seizing stuff again?
They're searching.
All about the tone, Michelle, the tone of his voice when he says they're searching. Your reaction?
Yeah, it's like he knows that they are about to find out what really went down, what really occurred in his backyard. It really does suggest the way that he is communicating, like you said, his tone, the intonation in his voice suggests that he is fully aware that these children were buried in his backyard, and that both he and Lori know exactly what he's alluding to when he's saying they're searching. And so it does implicate a level of guilt or culpability from my perspective.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that the jury is going to hear. Let's go back into the courtroom now. That sidebar broken up.